Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 259 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. So go and pick up that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, I actually worked for a Cisco Premier partner for many years in New York City, and I have nothing but respect for all of the Cisco employees that I worked with over a decade. They are truly the best in the industry, and our next guest is no exception to that rule. Our next guest is David Richards. He is a life strategist, a #1 international best-selling author, and speaker on personal development. He spent his early childhood living in various parts of the United States and 3 years living on the island of Okinawa, Japan. After graduating university with a degree in English, he was commissioned as an officer in the Marines. He served 15 years on active duty before deciding to break out from that path that his father and his brother had followed in making the military a career, and he left the Marines to pursue life as a civilian. That's when he joined Cisco Systems in 2006, and then shortly thereafter discovered yoga. A year later, he taught his first yoga class, realizing the fulfillment that came from helping others see their vision more clearly. He became a certified life coach. So now he works with individuals and organizations, conducting training through private coaching engagements, speaking events, and workshops. Welcome to the show, David.
Michael, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak with you and share with your audience.
Hey, man, I am so happy you're here. First and foremost, thank you so much for your service.
Absolutely.
That is what I like to lead with. Thank you very much for that. And I want to make sure that our audience understands a little bit more about your background. You decided on Penn State for your undergraduate experience. So tell our audience, what made Penn State the right decision for you?
I did. So it was a very narrow focus for me. So growing up in military bases, it's just a different environment because the whole base, everybody's parents are focused more or less on the same thing, and it has nothing to do with jobs. They're not thinking about college fairs. And I went to high school at Camp Lejeune, which is not a little, but a base outside on the coast of North Carolina. And certainly back then, in ancient history in the early 80s or mid 80s, the world wasn't as connected as we are today. And so because of the military, in the military, you get to declare what state you're a resident of. And so because my mother was from Pennsylvania, we decided Pennsylvania. So I applied to 2 universities. It was UNC and it was Penn State. And for me, the decision to go to Penn State was my brother went there. So there was at least someone I knew who was going to that university. It was the idea that certainly it was close to family because I had family in Pittsburgh. I had family outside of Philadelphia. So there's some familiarity there. And then it was honestly, I wanted to be a writer and I didn't know how to pursue that or what that was going to mean. I'd been approached by the Philadelphia College of Art because I had gotten a short story of mine had gotten national recognition during high school. But I thought, Penn State was cool because they just won the national championship the year before I went there. But it was really kind of this limited view. And I wanted to go ROTC because that was going to get me a scholarship. And that was going to kind of also set my path after college. And then it was really about, all right, well, where does it make sense to do that? And it was really the familiarity of going where my brother was, and then stepping into a place that had such a huge ROTC program like Penn State.
Very cool. Well, it's a great university. I've been there many times. So, it's just a beautiful, beautiful campus.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, Greek life is thriving on that campus. So, I got a tour of some of the fraternity houses there, and I was just completely blown away. I know you had your choice of many different organizations you could have joined at Penn State. You decided to join Sigma Tau Gamma fraternity. So what made you want to join this particular fraternity?
Again, yeah, so it was interesting. So there were a handful of fraternities that were on campus, and then there were preponderance that were off campus. And Sigma Tau Gamma at the time was affectionately known as ships, tanks, and guns because it was about 80% ROTC And then the part that wasn't ROTC was super liberal. Like it was just really liberal, like agricultural students, majors. So it was this fascinating dichotomy. And the house we lived in, and I don't think if any of my brothers listening or any alums or fellow SIGTAWs are listening, I don't think they'll be shocked by this, but the house was on the verge of being condemned. And it was in State College. It was like State College was beautiful. And then you had this house that was like circa the mid-70s animal house. The only thing missing was cars in the front yard, but like it was just dilapidated. And I remember coming back one summer early to work on the house, and we found like we had 160 zoning violations and we're going to be condemned if we didn't get those fixed. But it was, again, it was the ROTC piece for me, which was huge because that was a gateway into, that was a brotherhood that I was going to be a bigger part of after 4 years of college, right? And it was, there were Navy midshipmen, there were Marine midshipmen, we might have had a couple of Army, and it was just another path towards forming a bond with people, because certainly as you go through ROTC through college, you start to go through different rites of passage. Every summer you have a military event that you have to do. And for Marines, at the end of your junior year, you have to go what's known as officer candidate school. And it's 6 to 10 weeks. It is super intense. It is super competitive, and it's super stressful. And it changed my college career, because I was the spring semester before officer candidate school, you spend Monday, Wednesday, and Friday getting up at 6 a.m. to go work out and exercise. So Sigma Tau Gamma really was a place to kind of gravitate towards, because I knew the people there were going to all be going through a shared experience that I was going to go through. At the same time, it was fascinating too, because it was one of the very few places where we had friends who got killed like after they graduated, like they got killed in training missions and stuff. And that was something that just wasn't a part of the rest of the college experience to a certain extent, that I could, at least what I could tell. So it was really about the familiarity and just the camaraderie of going to a place that I knew was going to prepare me, at least to some degree, for getting ready to be a Marine.
I love that answer. That's fantastic. And, I'm happy that you found Sigma Tau Gamma. I think that is great. And I think other fraternities need to look at that too, because we do have a lot of veterans that come back to school after they serve in the military, and they're used to that brotherhood. They're used to that camaraderie. So fraternity makes a lot of sense to them, because it's, hey, I got your back, you got my back. I mean, it just fits right in. And I feel like it's a little bit underserved that, fraternities don't typically look at, let's say, ROTC or veterans as potential leaders for their fraternity, but they're actually the best leaders on college campuses. So we need guys like you.
It's so true. And we benefited, and there's a continual kind of payback, because the guys who were seniors had already gone through officer candidate school. And so they knew, like, they had gotten first real world exposure to what the Marine Corps was going to be like, because everyone goes through officer candidate school. And there's different entry points. It doesn't have to be ROTC. It could be some of the military academies. It could be, you could be enlisted as a Marine and get your college degree and then go through. So they would come back and provide experience. At the same time, we had people in the ROTC unit who had been previously enlisted in the Marines. And so they brought leadership, because they had been in the fleet. They had actually done training. That some of them had been in combat. And so that offers a completely different perspective. And that is leadership. That is fundamental leadership, because it synthesizes, and the beauty of being in the military is you get absolutely clear on what is essential and what isn't essential. And you don't worry about personal preferences or anything else. It's what is going to save the most lives or get us to accomplish the mission as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you were an officer of the U.S. Marine Corps for over 15 years. So, I mean, is there anything else that you can kind of, just hit on to say, this is a lifelong lesson that I took from my experience at the U.S. Marine Corps?
The biggest thing I would say is, as much as you rely on one another, you have to be the leader yourself, and you have to have the discipline over yourself. You can't rely on other people to discipline you, because if you're relying on that, then what you're really saying is, I'm a follower and I will operate in certain boundaries until I knock out of those boundaries and someone adjusts me. And it's certainly, I mean, you want people who do a sanity check for you, but you have to have the self-discipline to lead yourself. And especially as a leader, because I remember certainly when I was in combat landing in Somalia, you have people who are looking to you. And if you lose your head, they're going to lose their heads too. And So you have to kind of have this command presence about you that you're really calm. And you might be inside being like, oh my God, this is really insane, or this is messed up. But you have to have the presence of mind, be like, you know what, we're gonna get through this. What's the solution? So I guess if there's a life lesson to take out of it, is always look for the solution, because every problem has a solution.
Love it. So you've also been working for Cisco, which I have a ton of respect for over 16 years, specializing in customer support. So talk to us about this idea that you have, mastering the internet and the power of hyper focus.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great time we live in to this day and age, right? I mean, going back again, when I was in high school, getting ready to go to college, the world was not connected. We didn't have the internet. And so what you knew was limited by the research and the study you've done. And in this day and age, and I'll give you a great example, Michael. It's something I like to do because it's what I'm working on with my next book. 40 years ago, if I wanted to find out who the first 3 emperors of Rome were, if I was lucky, we might have encyclopedias that might have the information. If not, I had to get a ride, or if I had my own car, go to the library, go to the card catalog, which, if people don't know what that is, it was incredibly painful, and look up and see if they had a book on it, and then go see if the book was checked in, and then go find it. And that search could take weeks. That could literally take weeks to find out just that little piece of information, which today I can find out literally in seconds by my smartphone, my mobile device, whatever it is, or my computer. So in some ways, we are living in an unprecedented age of information creation, exchange, and consumption. And it's all great to be fascinated by social media and pursue likes and pursue followers, but use the internet as a tool. And what I mean by that is, I know in recent years, there's been this FOMO, this fear of missing out on something else that's happening. What I look at that, when I look at people who pursue that kind of thing, they're missing out on their own lives, because you have a unique spark inside you. Every one of us does. It is your purpose in life. It is this thing that you have that no one else has. It's your unique signature that you get to leave on the planet. And when I look at the power of the internet and really hyper focus, it's getting clear on the version of myself I want to become in the future, why I want to become that version, how it's going to contribute to other people. And then from there, I get really focused on, okay, what do I need to eliminate out of my life now that is not helping me accomplish that version of myself? And once I get clear on that, it's not about offending people, or I'm not spending time with you anymore because I don't like you. It's, you just can't help me on my purpose. You can't help me grow where I need to grow. And so I like to look at it as, there is plenty of mental junk food on the internet. There is plenty of mental junk food on the internet. I mean, it is a bastion, it is a buffet of junk food. Stay away from the junk food. That's really what it comes down to. Avoid the junk food and use the internet as a tool to harness this being inside each of us that is bigger, greater than anything that we can imagine, and keep driving to always constantly be improving. So I look at it as really, hyper focus is eliminating distractions and creating a compelling future for yourself that challenges you to grow every single day.
Fantastic. And you're absolutely right. The other day, I was thinking about all the different changes that happened from 1900 through the year 2000. I mean, when you think about how fast we moved in terms of technology,
Yep.
it's mind blowing. And then I start to think about what's going to happen over, this next 100 years. I mean, we can't even predict what's going to happen. So I love that you're talking about mastering the internet. I think it's fantastic.
Well, yeah. And I mean, just look at and what you just said, it's fantastic. I mean, I didn't used to be a big TV person, and I've started watching, I'll binge watch shows, but I realize it's such a different way to view TV. Like, you get a different content to the story. And I bring it up because when I grew up, and maybe when you grew up, we had 3 or 4 TV channels.
That's right.
And now it's almost like, in some weird way, with YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, everyone's becoming their own channel,
yeah,
which is fantastic. Be a show that people want to watch.
Yeah.
Be a show that people want to watch, because you're right. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to be in 5 years from now? Between the pandemic and the war in Russia and the political situation, this is just winter. We all have seasons in life. History is seasons. You talked about 100 years ago where things were, whether it was coming out of the Roaring '20s into World War II, or coming out of into the Great Depression. So there's always cycles to history. And this is a fascinating and fantastic time for us to be alive. And you're right. It's only like, where are we going to be in 5 years from now? Because it's fantastic to me.
We don't even know, but that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's an adventure, right? It really is.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about you, which I never would have expected, is that you're a yoga instructor and you even had your own yoga studio in North Carolina for some time. So talk to our audience. What made you get into yoga of all things, and why is that so helpful for you?
Yeah, it wasn't part of the plan. I will say that. One of the realities, you mentioned it at the outset in my intro, which, what a gracious intro. Thank you so much for that. Growing up in Japan, or living there for 3 years, it was when I was 10, 11, 12, and 13. So I celebrated 3 birthdays there, but was fascinating because, one, for the first time in my life, I was a minority. Like, even though we lived on this military base with all these other American families, you knew when you looked over the base fence that you were not in America, and you were the foreigner. And that was, especially that formative time, that was a really kind of daunting wake-up call to be exposed to a different culture and to have people look at you like, you don't belong here. Like, we tolerate you that you're here, but you don't belong here. And it wasn't animosity necessarily, but it was just a different experience. And when I came back to the States, I realized that I was a incredible minority of people who had that experience, because even in the Marine Corps, there's only probably 10% of the Marine Corps at any point goes to Okinawa, and that's probably ambitious too. So it's a very small percentage, and most of my classmates didn't have that experience. Well, I started meditating, or trying to meditate, when I was like 13 or 14 years old. My friends would be going out for parties, in high school, because that's what you did. You found out about the other sex and went drinking somewhere, and I would sit in my living room trying to meditate. And it was kind of this weird thing that I was attracted to because of my exposure to Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture. So when I got into the Marines, I would do a little bit of it, just especially in stressful situations, like when we landed in Somalia. That was pretty intense. And then when I decided, made the decision to get out, I knew I was going to work for Cisco, so I was excited about that. And literally, it happened over a weekend. I was at my parents' house in North Carolina, and I read a Sports Illustrated article about football players using yoga to strengthen their midsections, their core. And I was like, no, that's pretty cool. It's a manly thing if football players do it, so I'll give it a shot. So that weekend, I went to a yoga class, and it was what we call gentle yoga, so there's not a lot of stress. And I went through the class. I'm like, okay, this is all right, maybe. And then 2 days later, I went to a different class, different style instructor. I'm probably about 40 minutes into the class. I'm just drenched in sweat from moving. Like, we've just been moving our bodies, and I am pouring in sweat. And we're trying to do a bind where you're in this weird contortion and bringing your hands together behind your body. And I couldn't do it. And so I'm just watching the sweat drop off my forehead onto the mat. And this lovely woman who's the instructor comes by, and she whispers to me, "Use your hand towel." And so I grab my hand towel to wipe my face, and she's like, "No, use your hand towel to bind your hands." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then at the end of class, if you've never done a yoga class, there's a pose called Shavasana, where you just lie down and you're still for 5 minutes or 7 minutes, however long the instructor lets you. And I remember doing that, and it was just this fascinating moment of presence. Like, I was just aware. And part of it was my last assignment in the Marine Corps. I've been working a lot in Central America. And so I might get 50 email a week. And I'd already started working for Cisco shortly thereafter. And I would get like 50 email in 2 hours. And so I would leave work with just this noise of to-do lists and agendas and people I had to follow up with. And I couldn't, it was just overwhelming to me. And when I stepped onto a yoga mat in a yoga class, it got quiet. Like, my mind just got quiet, and I was like, I want more of that. And so after a year, I was hooked. I was like, I'm doing this. I became an instructor, and then that was it. I've been teaching ever since.
That's very cool. Yeah, I ran into yoga when I was in college because I needed to take some kind of sport or whatever phys ed type course, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's a good way to meet members of the opposite sex? Yoga. Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Yes.
And sure enough, I got there, and thinking it was going to be, I'm going to get a bunch of dates out of this, but the reality was, it really taught me how to relax my body. And even today, when I have, trouble sleeping or whatever, I can use those techniques that our instructor taught us to
Yep.
basically make each part of my body essentially shut down one at a time. And I'm asleep in literally 30 seconds. And people have no idea how I do it. It goes back to my yoga class that I took in college.
No, it's beautiful. Well, and the other thing it did for me really was, when you think about it, so my dad was a Marine, so I moved around because of him. Even though I wasn't wearing a uniform, I felt that effect. And then I served in the Marines. And so really for me, this was my first exposure to not being in the military. And even at Cisco, I supported military customers, but it was like, this was different. And so yoga was kind of this extreme swing of the needle from one side to the other, where I was going from this steel chewing Marine Corps combat veteran to someone who was looking for a spark inside them that was going to serve something greater than just themselves. And that was a big shift. It took me a while to kind of let down my guard, which is a funny thing to say, but I was super kind of tense initially when I got into yoga, because the community was so different from what I was exposed to and familiar with.
Sure. But that's a good thing. I think it
Really?
worked
Yeah,
out.
for sure.
It rounded you out really well.
It definitely did. Definitely.
Yeah, so that's really good. The other thing that you're really into is nutrition. So why should men hire a nutritionist and maybe even learn how to cook?
I could certainly appreciate what you said about yoga as a means of meeting members of the opposite sex.
Sure.
I've come to appreciate, and it's not that I've done this, but I certainly appreciate knowing your way around a kitchen as a man is a fantastic way to have people over for dinner. And I will tell you honestly, I've got a Spartan hat on. I do Spartan races, really athletic, and I had like done Body for Life. I don't know if you ever heard of Bill Phillips' Body for Life. He came out 20 years ago or something. But I appreciated 20 years ago that what you put into your body matters. When I was in the Marines, my boss and I would play basketball during our lunch hour because we had 90 minutes. And after that, we would go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke. And we would do that every day. And I was like 30 years old. And then one day we were playing basketball, and it was in Southern California, and our shirts, shirtless. And one of the female Marines is like, "Damn, sir, what's up with your midsection?" I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what I put in my body matters." And so I kind of got into this health kick, and then it fell off the wagon. So like during the Spartan races, I'd go work out at the gym really intensely. And then afterwards I'd go to Smoothie King and get a smoothie that was, the base ingredient was butter pecan ice cream. So like, yeah, like no, but it had protein in it, right? So get my protein fix. And then about 18 months ago, our gyms had opened up obviously after the pandemic, and I saw a friend of mine who was a trainer, and I hadn't seen her for about 3 months. And from the moment I saw her, she was transformed. She walked differently. She physically looked remarkable. And I saw her and I'm like, "What did you do?" And she's like, "I hired a nutritionist." I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, she's really competitive. She podiums in these Spartan events and competes for money." And she's like, "I hired a nutritionist." So I said, "Give me his information." So she gave me his information. I talked to him and I said, "This is what I'm trying to do." And he said, "Okay, I'm going to start you out." So we tracked like 3 or 4 days of what I ate. And then he gave me a menu, and I was used to putting down about 30,000 calories, 3,500 calories a day. And I remember the first menu he gave me, my caloric intake for each day was 1,850 calories. And I'm like, "Dude, you know I'm 200 pounds, right?" And he's like, "I know, it's not great." And I'm like, "Okay." And even within that first week, Michael, I could feel my body transform. I could literally, I was like, something is happening. I could feel my body was just like, "You're finally feeding us really good food." And it was. And it was gratifying to do my own grocery shopping and not get microwavable stuff, or not eat at Chipotle or Chick-fil-A as a resource for like my nutrition. And so it was getting groceries, and it was all like, healthy stuff. It was no prepackaged food or anything like that. And then preparing the meals was also incredibly rewarding too, because it made me appreciate a level of resiliency that I had in myself. And partly that was kind of coming out of the Marine Corps, where most of the time your food's provided for you, and it's certainly not going to be grade A food. But between it being really cheap and affordable, the nutritious value and how it physically changed my energy, my focus, my vitality in my body, and then just the empowerment that I had to know my way around the kitchen and to understand how the balance of micronutrients over the course of weeks and months really is essential in order to maximize your performance. And so it was one of the best investments I made. I stopped working with him back in April this past year, but I have like 40 weeks worth of menus. And so every week I just look at something else and I go pick up those groceries.
I love that you have all these different interests and you try new things. You kind of push the boundaries all the time into things that people would never expect you would be into. So, if our college students who are listening right now, maybe they're thinking they want to do something particular in life, but maybe they're not really good at it right now. What's your advice for them?
Keep hammering away at it. And it's a great story, right? So when I got out of the Marines, I wrote a little bit in the early 2000s. I started writing poetry again in the Marines, which those things don't go well. Like I had some of my fellow officers like, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, if I were, I don't know, that's a big deal. I'm not, but have you read my poetry? Because it's like, I wrote about like Greek mythology that was pretty kind of gory and violent. But when I got out, I realized I could be a writer. Like I could kind of rekindle this passion that I had since childhood. And I dismissed it when I joined the Marines because I thought, like, childhood, not going to be a writer, forget it. And I wanted to be the next Stephen King. So for 11 years, I tried to write a horror story. And I'd get a good idea. And it was cool because now living in one place where I wasn't moving, I could kind of get a sense of the town that I was in. And I wasn't always thinking about where my next assignment was going to be, my next duty station. I was like, I'm here as long as I want to be. And so I'd write about 100 pages, and then the story would just kind of break down. And so I'd be really frustrated and I couldn't develop the characters anymore, and I couldn't take the story where I wanted to. So I'd go away from it for about 6 to 12 months and I get another idea. Okay, I'm gonna do it this time. I do the same thing. And that happened for 11 years. And I remember, in fact, I was just writing about it in my next book. I was, in 2016, I had an awesome idea for a horror story. And I knew what the ending was going to be. I'm like, I've never had that before. I never knew where it was going to end. This is going to be cool. Same thing happened. I wrote 150 pages and I'm like, what the hell? Why can't I do this? And it was so frustrating to me because I wanted to be a writer. I desperately wanted to be a writer. And then someone gave me a whiskey and yoga t-shirt for Christmas, December 2016, because I like Scotch. And I taught yoga. And at the same time, I started reading Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And I would say, to people listening, if you want to change your life, read that book as many times as you need to until you understand what it's telling you, because it will transform your life. And in the first or second chapter of that book, Hill asks the reader, what is your purpose in life? And Michael, that question changed the trajectory of my life. I had never thought that my life would have a magnetic north to it, because I was just kind of existing. And especially in the military, you don't think of yourself, like, you don't think about designing your life. You think about serving your country and being ready. Like, you think about keeping yourself kind of in this hair trigger mindset, because at any moment you could be called to go do something. And now, like, being exposed to the idea that I could create my life or design it or point it in a certain direction and have something come of it that could be fruitful for me, but also fruitful for others, was revolutionary to me. And so I remember I read that part of the book, and I put the book down. I'm like, oh my God. And so I grabbed a pen and paper and I wrote my first life purpose statement. And I said, the purpose of my life is to help people find their purpose in life. And so I said, I'm going to write a book about finding your purpose in life. And that's what I did. I wrote Whiskey and Yoga. But I bring it up to answer your question. I was shifting. So I had, for over a decade, I had wanted to be a horror writer, and I just couldn't. I wasn't good at it, but I wanted to be a writer more. And when the opportunity to write Whiskey and Yoga came up, I wrote, just to kind of give you more context, I wrote 200 pages in January 2017 to April 2017. I wrote 200 pages, and then around April, I looked where I was and I was like, this is not it. This is not it. So I threw everything away. 200 pages pushed aside. I wrote a 10-chapter outline about how to find your purpose in life. And in 2 months, I wrote the book, went on to become a #1 international bestseller. So I say that is hammer away. If you think you're good at something and you can't cross that threshold, keep hammering it away, because eventually you'll either break through and you'll be good at it, or you'll get to the point where you realize how you need to change your approach And when you look at what you're trying to accomplish differently, you'll realize there's a different path you can take.
Excellent advice. I want to know more about your other book too. It's called The Lighthouse Keeper, A Story of Mind Mastery. What's that book all about?
So that book was actually born from Whiskey and Yoga, and it came out of a yoga class. And as a yoga instructor, one of the fundamental tenets of yoga is the relationship between the observer and the observed. And it's kind of the same. It's fascinating because in a lot of ways, that's now what we're understanding about quantum mechanics is the same thing. There's a relationship between you as the observer and what you're observing, and what you're observing reacts to, even if it's inanimate. Like we know light responds to how people look at it. So the idea was I would go to my classes sometimes and I'd say, you know what, your life is a movie and you are the director, but what are you filming? Are you filming a tragedy? Are you filming a comedy? Are you filming an adventure? Is it a romance? What are you filming? And then one day I came in and said, you know what? Your mind is an ocean where all your memories are, everyone you've ever met is in this ocean. And your awareness, or where you place your attention, is the lighthouse. And most of us go through lives and we create these patterns where the lighthouse goes in the same direction every day, day after day. And so there's nothing really new, but through discipline, through meditation, through willpower, through focus, you can start to say, you know what, I want the lighthouse to go where I want it to go. And so I'm going to focus my awareness to a certain place. And so again, it was in Whiskey and Yoga, which came out in 2017. And I knew, like, when I only wrote like 2 or 3 pages on it in the book, but I really liked the idea behind it. And then about 18 months later, I was on YouTube and I saw, have you ever heard of Dandapani, the Hindu monk?
Sure.
Yeah, so he had a video on YouTube and he said the same thing. He said, your mind is this blank canvas and there's an orb of light that's your awareness and it just goes over. And I was like, oh my God, he's talking about the lighthouse. And I knew I had the inspiration for the book. So that was probably, I want to say again, Christmas always happens to be a good time for me, I guess, but I was right around Christmas. So in December of 2018, the idea for the Lighthouse Keeper was born. And the difference for this was, what was really exciting to me was, whereas Whiskey and Yoga had been pure self-help, me sharing personal stories of how I had made mistakes or learned from those mistakes as I went through my life to help me find my purpose and help other people find their purpose. The Lighthouse Keeper, now I could kind of dabble into fiction, which is exciting to me because it was kind of bringing together the fact that I wanted to be a fiction writer, but it was also, it had a helpful tone to it because the protagonist, Sam, during his journey, writes notes at the end of every chapter on this is what I need to do to really get focused and really be present in my life so I can drive my awareness. So it released during the pandemic and it's been doing really well. So I'm really proud of that book and looking forward to the next one.
Man, that sounds awesome. I can't wait to see the next one that you come up with Christmas time. I'm going to give you a call and see what you're working on.
It's controversial, but it's also the most beautiful love story I can imagine. So I'm pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. Now, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So I want to know, what's your favorite local restaurant there in North Carolina that I need to try out?
I was going to say a barbecue place because that's what North Carolina is known for. I'm going to break from that path. There is a fantastic restaurant here just outside Raleigh called Mez, M-E-Z. It's kind of, I wouldn't even say it's upscale, but it's just modern Mexican cuisine. The dishes they have are so fantastic and the food is quality. The guacamole is incredible. The ambiance is fantastic. It is by far one of my favorite restaurants to go to. So if you're ever down, or if you ever come over from Tennessee, you've got to go to Mez.
I definitely will. Yeah, we get our fill of barbecue here, but modern Mexican, that sounds right up my alley. I'm definitely going to have to hit that up. I will definitely give you a call. We'll go and hit that place up, get some good modern Mexican.
I love it. Sounds good.
That sounds really good. So if our listeners, if they want to connect with you, if they want to buy your books, maybe they want to bring you in to speak on their college campus, where should they go?
Yeah, davidrichardsauthor.com. So that is my website. Check it out. Both my books are available there. I've got blogs. I've got past podcast interviews I've done. We're going to be revamping the website over the summer to get ready for the next book. I'm also on Instagram at David Richards Author as well. So I welcome people to come check me out and happy to come speak with you.
Fantastic. davidrichardsauthor.com. Go and check it out. Pick up his books. Go connect with him on social media. What can I say, David? I have all the respect in the world for everything that you've done with your career. And I just love that you just kind of, float and figure out where it is that you need to be. And you're not afraid to try new things, even though, let's say an officer in the Marine Corps might not be known as, a poet, but you're saying, so what? If that's what motivates you, go out and do it. Why do you have to fit in this nice little neat box? If you want to write poetry, then go ahead and write poetry.
It's exactly it. And it's honestly, the power of individual identity the opportunity for that has never been greater than history than it is today. So I encourage everyone to break the molds and be your own person.
I love it. That's a great parting message for our audience. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this talk with David, make sure you like it. Make sure you share it on social media with other fraternity members, sorority members, other college students on your campus. And David, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you next time.